Welcome to Detoxicity, a podcast that aims to reframe the narrative around masculinity by way of sharing experiences and stories. If you're looking for one of those alpha male podcasts that isn't centered around things like inclusivity and vulnerability, you are in the wrong place. Or maybe you're in the right place if you recognize that the Joe Rogans and the Red Pills of the world shouldn't be the norm. Anyway, I'm Mike Joseph, I host and produce this show, and I'm happy you're here. We are closing in on 5 years of this podcast, and I appreciate all the support I've received and would love to thank everyone who's been a guest now and in the future for allowing yourselves this space to share your story. If you'd like to know more about the guests, I suggest following them on social media. I usually mention where you can find them at the end of each episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Detoxpod-featuring. You can request a free coaching consultation from me at mike-joseph.com. And you can support Detoxicity by spreading the word to friends, by liking and commenting on whatever platform you're using to listen, or by becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/detoxicitypod and subscribe for as little as $3 a month, and you will get early access to episodes. I'll even send you a cool Detoxpod fridge magnet. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this latest episode. So, a few months ago, I reached out to my buddy Brian, who has been on this show before and actually will be on this show again. And I asked him to recommend some people that he knew that would be good for the show. And he pointed out a friend of his named Shawn Setaro, and gave me a copy of Shawn Setaro's book, which is called Dummy Boy. It's about the Tekashi 6 9 trial, and I'd seen it before, didn't really dig into it because I'm not a fan of the artist and don't particularly have interest in reading about him, but I read the book, got connected to Shawn, we reached out to each other, realized that we're neighbors, and decided to hook up for an episode of this podcast. And what you are about to listen to is a great conversation in which we cover Shawn's life, his career as a musician, and his new career as a journalist. So for those who don't know, Shawn currently reports for Complex, most recently covering the Diddy trial. We get very deep into that. But previously, he has written for The Atlantic, Vibe, GQ, and Forbes. He has worked for Genius.com. That is more or less where he started. And he hosted The Cypher, which is a podcast featuring interviews with 250 legendary figures in hip-hop. I need to dig into that. Our conversation covers everything from my disillusionment, that is a word, my disillusionment with hip-hop, to a conversation about our favorite MCs of all time, to some thoughts on masculinity and coercive control in the wake of the Diddy trial, to him growing up and becoming a fan of hip-hop music and having a career as a musician. And it also covers activism and, how he aims to change the narrative around masculinity in his own world. So, everybody, check out Shawn. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it.
Hey, I'm Shawn Setaro, writer, reporter, music guy, former musician turned music journalist, and somehow now deep in the throes of court reporting. So that's me.
That's a few different twists and turns there.
I've had a lot of lives, Mike.
This podcast is all about people who have had a lot of lives. So I appreciate that you took the time to sit and talk. I guess, what was your start in music, and how did you then pivot from music to journalism?
So I grew up playing guitar and bass and stuff. I'm a Berkeley alum, EE, not EY. So that's the one in Boston for your
We have had
listeners.
plenty of Berkeley alum and faculty on this show.
Yeah. And so spent a long time playing in bands and teaching and doing session work and sideman gigs and all of the things that one has to do to try to make a go of it as a musician in Boston and then in New York. And sometime around, I guess it must have been 2009 or so, the end of 2009. I stumbled across a website that was then called Rap Exegesis that felt like someone had taken my brain and put it on the internet. I didn't know at the time the people involved in it, but it sort of matched up. I had always thought of rap lyrics as sort of containing almost hyperlinks, right? I had sort of visualized this song references this lyric references this. I'd sort of been envisioning them as hyperlinks in my head. And so to see that on a website was amazing, and I quickly got involved. No one knew what exegesis means. Also, having a website, a URL that starts with those first four letters, not great.
Mm.
So the name very quickly got changed to Rap Genius. I was the editor in chief of that. And by the time that run ended, that was like 2014. And I, at that point, was like, I guess I'm a music journalist now. I had written a ton of places. I had a podcast going. I knew a ton of people in the rap media world. So I just kind of kept going from that. Eventually ended up doing a bunch of stuff, Forbes, Complex, freelancing a whole bunch of places. And now I am currently full time at Complex.
Awesome. And what is your tie specifically to hip hop? I'm always curious to see where hip hop came into the picture for people, especially people that ain't black. So,
Right. Completely fair question.
yes.
So there's sort of a layered answer there. The short and most direct version is that when I was in college, right, at Berkeley, you're studying jazz. Everything you're listening to is sort of, how is that done? How could I do that? And I found myself reflexively listening to rap a ton because it was music I did not want to make, had no interest in making, felt like it was very divorced from it was something I could listen to for fun and not think about like, how might I do this? Because that was not anywhere near being on the table. Later, of course, I ended up playing bass in a rap rock band and having a job analyzing rap lyrics. So there you go. But it's the paths life takes us on. Anyway, that got me from rap being a portion of my listening to most of it was sort of gradually over the course of years, starting as sort of a reflexive thing in college and continuing for a number of years afterwards, to the point that by the early 2000s, it was almost all of my listening. My initial introduction to it, I mean, look, I am in my late 40s, and so rap, as I became aware of it, or hip hop culture more broadly, Mike Holman used to call breakdancing the lost leader of hip hop, right?
Huh. All right.
And so I definitely remember the breakdancing craze of the 80s, even making it out to the New Jersey suburbs. And I think we're more or less the same age. So
I
you'll
think we are
remember
more or less the same age.
the impact that Run DMC made. I would say that those guys in particular, and the Beasties, obviously. Run DMC, though, were great for kids, right? If you're 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, and the stuff sounds like nursery rhymes, there's jokes, right? You Be
Right.
Illin is perfect for grammar school kids, right? The humor
Yeah.
is sort of at that level. All of the respect and no disrespect to those guys at all. So I think that was sort of some of the first stuff I remember being aware of, things that crossed over, and it became funny years and years and years later when I got to meet Bill Adler, who, as much, if not more than anyone else, was responsible for that music getting all the way to the New Jersey suburbs, 70 minutes or so in distance from New York City, but a world
Yeah.
away culturally,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so it was incredible to meet him and think of him as eventually as a friend and a mentor, and just to be like, wait, that was you. Like, you more or less were responsible for making sure that they got the press that thus it ended up in my grubby little hands as a 10-year-old, right? So that's the beginning of the story, I guess.
What was 10-year-old Sean digging? What was inspiring you to become a musician? Who were you taking pointers from?
Oh man. Well, there was initially the stuff my dad liked, the Beatles and all of this kind of thing. But honestly, if you look at who was playing guitar in the 80s, there were a lot of metal bands, right? It was definitely sort of Guitar Hero Central. Definitely the Slashes of the world were big
Sure.
influences initially. As I got more and more into different kinds of music, then it expanded, and there was all sorts of jazz and classical and blues and all this other stuff. I was way, way into blues as a teen. Even I remember going to, there used to be this blues festival in Penn's Landing every year in Philly, and I got to see so many of the greats before they passed, John Lee Hooker and Albert Collins and all these guys. So the palette expanded the more I kept playing, I guess is how I would put it.
Right on. And I'm actually curious, do you still play now or are you retired? What's the deal
I
there?
I do not. The instruments are in a closet. Maybe someday, perhaps for fun. There was never a point at which I said I'm done, right? It was just like got tougher and tougher to balance. A lot of the gigs fell out as I got more involved in teaching. Then journalism took over more and more of that time. And eventually people stop calling after you turn them down 2 or 3 times. And I have an idea like, oh, one of these days I'll find some sort of pickup thing and get back into it. It sounds fun, or see what some old friends are doing, but not as yet. I would say I am on an extended hiatus, let's say.
Okay. So there's a couple of different paths
Mhm.
I've got in my brain, and one is Sean court reporter, and the other is Sean human being. Presumably, you did not set out to become a court reporter when you
Oh,
start with like.
completely ordered to slash by accident, you know?
Okay,
Yeah.
how much of it was ordered to? How much of it was by accident?
So basically, this was 2017, somewhere around there, 2017, 2018. Way in those halcyon long ago
Oh
days,
God.
there was a thing called SoundCloud Rap that some of your older listeners might remember. All kidding aside, though, I was at that point a staff writer at Complex, and that stuff was everywhere and very tough to cover from two angles, right? One was a lot of the artists felt they didn't need us. They could just talk to Instagram directly. This obviously hasn't gone anywhere.
Yep.
And then there was this idea that a lot of the prominent artists had objectionable things in their personal life or accusations or things like this. And so if you're writing about them and they're not talking to you, what do? You don't want to ignore it, but you also don't want to start every article with 3 paragraphs of caveats because the reader tunes out and no one cares and it loses its impact, right?
People's attention spans are short.
And yeah, so we were sort of trying to find a way in. 6 9 was sort of starting to blow up. And I was sort of ordered to be like, well, maybe this Treyway guy who's always around him in his videos, who's he? Find out that. And so I spent a couple weeks or maybe even months looking into that and going into corners of Instagram that you don't want to go, of like friends of gang members in Connecticut and all this kind of stuff, right? And just as I was sort of starting to get a sense of this larger ecosystem around this Treyway guy, and 6 9 and a handful of other people were arrested in a federal racketeering case. And I got told go to court. And I said, what does that mean? What court? Where? How do I know when it is? Uh, and I managed to figure it out. I've said this before, but the first time I went to what I thought was Tekashi's initial hearing, I got the room right. I got the building right. I got the judge right, but I got the day wrong.
Oh,
And so I was sitting there. I still remember this, sitting in a courtroom, listening to someone talk about theft from Whole Foods or something for a long time before I figured out that this is not just the wrong guy, but something's not going to happen after this,
right.
right? This is the main event. But I eventually got my footing and did a lot of learning on the job and really lived that story for a long time. Ended up covering it for the site, doing a narrative podcast about it, and ultimately writing a book about the whole thing. And by the end of that, I more or less knew what I was doing when it came to court reporting. I could look up documents and knew what hearings were. And, I'm always learning a tremendous amount, but had at least enough footing to kind of figure out what was happening. Part of that, incidentally, was just because no one was around to tell me what to do.
Mm.
So, being someone who likes being prepared, I would go to everything, whether the star was there or not. There were a bunch of defendants in that case. Tekashi, people might not remember. So I would go to stuff for all of the defendants, even the hearing that was just to figure out the date of the next hearing. And no one was telling me not to. I could just sort of leave the office and go. I had blessedly free reign to do that kind of thing. And so I learned a lot on the job because there was not a pressure to get the big get every single time, right? I could really immerse myself in this one case and not have to cover every other big court case in New York City like a lot of court reporters do.
Sure. I'm wondering lots of things right now, actually. But First thing is, are the specific things that separate a court reporter from a reporter?
Sure. I mean, I I don't necessarily think there's any sort of hard and fast line. I think it's just people who report on stuff that happens in courts, right? The skills are the same, the skepticism you need to bring is the same. There's just a lot of weird shit that happens in court that you don't see other places, right?
Speaking as someone who has not spent very much time in court at all, I'm curious what some of that weird shit is.
It's just a lot of indirect things. There's a lot of paperwork where people say this guy's a liar, F him, but in very highfalutin language, right?
Yes,
Or
okay.
in very indirect ways. So they're sort of figuring out what people mean, right? Or why they might be doing certain things. There's also a lot of preamble, right? You can't just come out and say something, you have to work around it, or, people will try to say, oh, you can't say this. Well, why not? And then they fight about it back and forth. There's just a lot of little things that you need to figure out procedurally. So I think that's the main difference is you're just watching stuff play out over many weeks or months sometimes rather than being like, "Oh, there's a fire, what happened?"
Right. It's so interesting to me that the legal process in America, I can't really speak for anywhere else, is so unnecessarily theatrical.
Mhm.
Because honestly, you could get the particulars of a case and make a decision theoretically in hours or a couple of days, and said in much simpler terms than it is generally conveyed in a trial, at least from the legal movies and the episodes of Law and Order that I've watched. But it just seems like there's this whole element of theater to it.
Well, sometimes, but then a lot of times on the ground, it's a different kind of theater, meaning just a very standard playbook that is run over and over again, where okay, the cop says he has a gun, so he's automatically indicted. The judge is in a bad mood that day, so they say the bail is this much, right?
Yeah.
On the lower end where you don't have 7 or 8 high-paid attorneys all the time. A very different kind of show, I guess
Sure.
I would
Yeah,
say.
I'd imagine the more high profile trial is, the more theater is introduced
Yes,
to it.
absolutely. That has been my experience.
I would also imagine, considering what you did on the Tekashi case, covering it as a journalist, then talking about it on podcasts, and then writing a book about it, I feel like you would almost sort of become a law student to an extent at that point.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the podcast was about him overall, right? His whole career life, so it was talking to anyone I could get around him. But yeah, seeing a case up close for that long, you definitely get all of the nuances and all of the
Sure.
subtleties that happen leading up to the trial and at the trial and afterwards. And you get to know witnesses and they tell you stuff and all kinds of things. So yeah, it was a very intense experience. And there weren't that many people there for everything, right? There were a lot of people there the days Takashi testified. There weren't that many media there all the time, so everyone, including the defendants, knew who I was,
Right.
which can be a little unnerving when you hear
I
some of the
bet.
stuff some of the defendants are accused of
Yeah, I bet.
or convicted of. There was one time I had to go to the bathroom and one of the defendants was there. There was a guard, obviously, so there wasn't any actual danger, but he was just like, "Hey, man, you got to stop killing me out there." And it was just like, oh, this guy who kidnapped someone and slashed someone else knows who I am
Hmm.
and just like joking around with me. That's quite a job.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, presumably, the writing you did on that case is what led Complex to also hire you or bring you on to cover the Diddy trial.
Yeah, I mean, there was some stuff in between, but yes, that provided the base that then I continued doing other court stuff. And then when Diddy came down the pike, they said, okay, well, we want this guy to cover it.
And obvious reasons, you can't talk a whole lot, presumably, about what went on in the trial. And truthfully, I'm
I
not.
mean, I can
All
tell
right.
you what happened. That's all public record. I mean, I got the transcript every day. Like any questions you have, I'm happy to talk about it. I don't know how much this is a family show.
It's very
Um,
much not a family show.
yeah. I mean, the one thing that I will say about it, I mean, I'll say a lot about it, but I think it dovetails in a lot of ways with the subject of your show, right? In a less sort of serious way, one thing it did right from the beginning was while I was covering it, any sense I had of what was polite to say to people in public blew up within like 2 days because the first witness they had, or one of the first, was an escort who was talking in very graphic detail about they asked me to come in, I did this and this happened and this happened, and it's a very august, high ceilinged courtroom or federal courtroom, fancy building. And everyone in there is very quiet and respectful, and you're in these hardwood benches that seem like church pews, and this stuff is being said. And so it's sort of like almost subconsciously, I would find myself just saying stuff to people that I would never 2 weeks before have thought about saying that are in terms of things being graphic or whatever. It just sort
Sure.
of blew that out of the water almost immediately.
Yeah, it's hard to really come up with a succinct idea of even what I want to talk about with regards to that because there's so many angles, right? There's me as somebody who's worked in the music industry for 30 years. There's me as a black man. There's me as a hip hop fan. There's me as someone who, hopefully, maybe I'm not the judge of this, has evolved as a human being over the years and was one person when I was 19, another person when I was 29, and now a different person than now that I'm 49. There's so many layers, and and it ties into so much stuff that we've talked about, that I've talked about with other guests on this podcast, whether it's abuse people, whether it's being drunk with power and using that to just kind of create your own universe where you don't have people on the outside world who can reach you with love and care and support. It's treating women like shit. It's treating other men like shit. It's all of this stuff combined. I'm curious what you came away with after that, if you can even wrap it up in a bow, and you probably can't.
So, to be clear, right, he was found not guilty of the
Right,
most serious charges,
right.
right? So, be perfectly clear about that in a legal sense. But I think if you look at what they said, right, they described situations where they were forced or lied to and put in these sexual situations, right? Over and over and over again. Ultimately, the jury did not buy that. Again, want to be clear about that for
Sure. For legal purposes.
reputational
Yeah, yeah,
reasons, right?
absolutely.
But that's what they said. And that is a very sobering thing to hear over and over again over the course of 7 weeks, right? There was one witness who accused him of sexually assaulting her so many times that she couldn't even remember them. She remembered a few and the rest were flashes and blurs. There were a ton of incidents of violence. If you believe the testimony of these women, which again, it does not appear that the jury gave them a ton of credence, so make of that what you will.
Right.
If you believe their testimony, it seems like he was a very controlling person. And even if he wasn't violent all of the time, he set up situations where they acted how they acted because it was the option with the fewest consequences, right? He was accused of exerting financial control over a lot of these women, right? You know, one of the things I have been thinking about a lot is the prosecution brought on a forensic psychologist who did not know him, but was brought on to talk about why abuse victims stay in relationships. Because Cassie was with him for almost 11 years. And you don't want the jury being like, well, why didn't she just walk out the door? She must have wanted to be there, right? These are the kinds of thoughts that the prosecution wanted to counter by bringing on this psychologist, Dr. Dawn Hughes. Dr. Hughes introduced this concept that was new to me that she could not actually call by name in the trial for complicated legal reasons that would bore your audience to tears to explain. That concept is called coercive control.
Mm-hmm.
And I recommend all of your audience just look up coercive control, what it is, how it works, and think about it if it could possibly connect to any alleged behavior they may have heard about.
I think that makes a lot of sense. A past me would have looked at that relationship and been like, well, why did she stay?
Mhm.
I know enough about the world now that I understand how hard it is to leave. I also know that you shouldn't victim blame, but it frustrates me that there's still an element of humanity that feels like things like that are so cut and dry.
So here's one thing about this trial, right? The defense put a lot of stock in text messages, right? Text messages of Cassie and the woman who testified under the name Jane Doe saying stuff like, oh, I want to freak off, or sending graphic sexual text messages to Diddy, or sometimes arranging these nights. Now, the defense said this means what you think it means. She's saying, I want to do it. That means she wants to do it.
Sure,
What's the problem? It was voluntary. And I wasn't there in the deliberation, so I don't know, but they made a decision that seemed to be in line with that interpretation.
sure,
If you had to guess based on their decision how they interpret the text messages, you would guess that they interpreted them literally. That the woman says, I want to do this. The woman says, I want to do X. They say, oh, it means the woman wants to do X. Okay. The government offered another interpretation of those messages. And I think the evidence indicated and the testimony indicated there was maybe another way to read those messages. And that way is this guy asked me 14 times what I want to do tonight. And no matter what I answer, it always ends up me and him in an escort in a hotel room. So when he asked me the 15th time, what do you want to do tonight? Why don't I just answer me, you, and an escort in a hotel room?
right,
Because I know no matter what I say, it's going to end up.
right,
Right. Or, if they send a sexy text message, the subtext is, well, I want to have sex with you, not someone else, not a stranger, you. That's why I'm sending you this racy text message. Whereas I think the defense might argue it means they loved everything about their sex life. And even if they didn't love this thing, they were willing to do it to please him and because they wanted to spend time with him and it was their adult choice. Right. So there are different ways of reading these messages.
sure.
And I think ultimately the jury chose to interpret them how they chose to interpret them. But I would encourage people, these are publicly available exhibits, both on the prosecution and defense side. And I would say look at them and see, can they in fact be read two different ways? And what does it mean to read them one way? What does it mean to read them the other?
Sure. I'm zooming out, right? And I grew up where I grew up. I know the street element. I generally have no issues with people who are free sexually. I recorded an episode of this podcast at a swingers resort. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have, eh, eh, reporting on any case that you've reported on. Do you, my unfiltered question is, don't you feel like you want to have to take the longest shower ever?
I mean, so you're right that the way Combs's lawyers portrayed this is that he was a swinger. They use this term swingers lifestyle a lot. I don't know if that's a term people in that milieu actually use or if they made it up to get across to the jury. I don't know. I'm not asking you, by the way. I'm just sort of
Right.
saying
Yeah.
rhetorically. That is how they portrayed it. He was into swinging. And they did go to swingers clubs sometimes. They went to sex clubs, not that frequently as compared to how many times they did this very repetitive action of hiring escorts and going through this choreographed routine. And it's tough to hear about. If you believe, like the women said, and particularly Cassie, that she did not want to do these things, she had to do them hundreds of times. And each individual time could sometimes last several days and involve several escorts, each of whom you might have several rounds of this routine with. So by the time you're done with all that, no wonder it's a day or two or three,
Sure.
and you're on lots of drugs and can't sleep. That was very harrowing to hear about. And you're hearing about it before you know how the jury is going to come down on it, right? Everything about it is very much up in the air. And I think even the defense team might not believe what Cassie said about it, but I think even they would agree that it's harrowing to hear her take on it, albeit they might say, well, she agreed at the time and now she's regretful or whatever. These kinds of things, when you get the impression that when the people are telling you that they did not, that they found it demeaning and not sexy, was very hard to hear. And it was very, very repetitive, right? I don't want to get too deep into it. I'm not an expert or a psychologist or a doctor, but it did seem good behavior was something it seemed like he kept doing for decades. When he was arrested, he had the materials for these freak offs in his hotel room and at his homes. So even in his mid 50s, it wasn't like he was stopping.
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't know. Again, there's so much stuff, and I don't want to sound like I'm bouncing around a bunch, but we were at a show last week.
Right.
We went to see Little Brother, and there was a bit of a wait because Little Brother had some behind the scenes stuff that was happening. There were some missed flights, and so the show started a little bit later than normal. So there was a lot of pre show music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you arrived relatively late in the game, but me and my buddy Eli were there from like 7 o'clock
Mm.
listening to this music, and every third song was a Diddy song.
That was weird. That was a weird playlist.
Right.
Yeah.
And that shit felt really uncomfortable to me. And I look in the audience, and the shit that killed me is there's black women in the audience dancing and jamming to this shit. And I don't know, man. I as a hip hop fan, and not just speaking about Sean Combs here, I'm finding it real, real hard as a woke, older, middle-aged human being who grew up with hip hop to really feel like a hip hop fan anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I understand that culturally, my experience and your experience with that are going to be very different. But I'm wondering if you feel that at all, or if you've spoken to people around you who feel that, like you're still working in hip hop journalism, an era when I feel like journalism is dead and hip hop is dead.
I mean, look, there's always going to be interesting stuff going on in music and in rap. And if you look for it, it's around, and plenty of people are making vital music. So let's start there, I think. But yeah, it makes me think of a lot of stuff. As you age and your attitudes change, your attitude toward the music you love can get complicated, right? But that's interesting. I think you want to hold that and try to, I don't know, maybe there's some kind of third way between dismissing stuff out of hand and being super defensive,
Yeah,
and
I
being
mean,
like, oh man, well, times were different and everyone was saying the F word all the time. Because no,
that,
they weren't,
right, and
even
that's the
in
thing,
even in 2000, they weren't. It was more common and accepted, but at the same time, it wasn't like people didn't know that was,
everybody knew it was wrong.
yeah, yeah.
Everybody knew it was wrong. It's weird, man. I mean, two things I come away with are one, and this isn't exclusive to hip hop, having to like reassess my feelings and my memories about certain artists that I held dear.
Hmm.
And to be clear, I was never a Bad Boy fan.
Hmm.
So I was one of those anti shiny suit people back in the day. But thinking about Kanye, thinking about lots of people, again, not exclusive to hip hop, where who music has been my life for almost the entire time I've been alive. And I've developed attachments to a lot of these people. And to be disappointed by them so profoundly,
Hmm.
it feels like a personal affront. Like American Boy came on like earlier, and I was like, oh fuck this, gotta turn this shit off. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is lyrical content. A couple days ago, had my Apple Music on random play, playing my library, and this song called Truly Yours by Cool G Rap came on.
Hmm.
Came out in like 88, 89. I was maybe 11, 12 years old when that song came out. Loved it. But this was the first time in a long time that I really sat and listened to the lyrics. And there's a whole verse in that song, which is basically coded gay slur after coded gay slur after coded gay slur.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm a queer person. I can't listen to this shit. This shit makes me uncomfortable. And it's rough because again, these are teenage Mike memories,
Of course.
and Kanye isn't even a teenage Mike. Kanye is a 30 something Mike memory.
Right.
So it's hard to balance my brain against all that stuff. And I will say that despite the fact that there are reprehensible humans in all genres of music, from a lyrical perspective, the majority of the stuff that I've grown to have problems with is hip hop.
Mhm. I mean, there's just more words for one thing.
Right,
So
right,
there's more chance that someone will say something that will rub you the wrong way. It's also, in general, a different type of lyric writing that is in some ways more literal, right? Just meant to be evocative, right? And in so many rock songs, words are effectively placeholders that
sure,
have the right vowel sounds at the right time.
sure,
So
sure.
yeah, that makes sense for a number of reasons, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. Obviously, as you age, you don't know how you're going to feel as you age. So every sort of new and weird feeling is new and weird. Like, man, I was digging this shit 10 years ago, and now it's just like the script is flipped a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, I guess part of it is you're being my therapist right now.
We'll discuss my hourly rate offline here.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're also a hip hop fan, and we've only hung out a couple of times, but it appears to me from the times I've interacted with you, and also based on who I know you because of, that you've got a very good personal ethos. So it's kind of like, how do you jive that?
Whew. I mean, everything's situational. You know what I mean? I try to handle things in the moment. When I saw Kanye at the Diddy trial, happened to be as close to alone as you're going to get with Kanye West these days. It was me, one of Diddy's sort of close friends slash surrogates, Christian Combs, and about three security guys. And that was it. No other press, just sort of the way things fell out. We were waiting for an elevator.
Right.
And I kept thinking, should I say something? Should I say something? And then I was like, well, but I'm here as press. I'm not here as the guy who needs to criticize him for being an anti Semite or being sexist or whatever. And I was like, what are the chances that I'm going to be the one to say the thing to make him be like, you know what? I was wrong.
Of
I
course.
don't have the magic words. And so I effectively talked myself out of saying something and took a different elevator because he obviously wasn't going to get on an elevator with someone with a press badge around their neck. That was made pretty clear. And so maybe I failed then, right?
I
You
don't
know?
know. The Sesame Street that lives within me is like one person can make a difference, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of one people have tried to make differences in that particular man's life, and no one has succeeded.
Right.
So maybe that's not going to work.
But you sort of take things as they come. I don't have any sort of grand answer, right? I will say I try to keep context in mind. I don't always succeed at this, but I try a lot of the time. Uh, How that plays out in court is I still remember one of the first times I was in federal court for a hearing. And I looked around and I thought, oh man, the only white people in here are working, right? It was me, it was the guards, it was the judge, it was the clerk, whatever. And that wasn't literally true. I think one or two white people may have been there as friends of one of the defendants or whatever. But it was close enough to being true that that's how I remember,
Sure.
right? And that was Sean beginning his legal reporting journey, right? Maybe the 80th room I go into, I no longer notice it. But part of me wants to always have that beginner brain and notice these kinds of things that are maybe naturalized if you're there a lot, but that point out inequities, right? And so I think that's the other thing too is trying to not get so caught up in minutia that you lose track of larger contexts of things. That's part of it too. And I think this is ultimately like the law Sean Combs was convicted on. It has not in recent decades been used, the Mann Act, was known as the White Slave Act of, I don't know, 1910 or whenever the hell it was passed. It is not, to the best of my knowledge and research, currently and for many decades, used and enforced and prosecuted in a racist way, but it has racist roots,
Sure. And I
you
even
know?
remember as a music fan knowing about Chuck Berry and I think Little Richard, who back in the 50s were prosecuted. I believe Chuck Berry did time
Mm.
for Mann Act violations, which were basically just trumped up charges for them having sex with white women, or
Right,
maybe in Little Richard's case for being gay.
right, and obviously it was famously used on Jack Johnson, the
Right.
the black boxer, whatever, so, I don't know, the world is complicated, just try to keep the context in mind, there's always more than what's happening right now.
Sure.
These are the bromides I have for you, I don't have anything genius, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But that does give a nice segue into, so to give a little context here,
Mhm.
I was visiting my buddy Brian Dunn, who has been on this show before and will be on this show again, upstate, where he now resides with his lovely wife and dog. And we were talking about people that would be a good fit for the podcast. And he was like, "Hey, I know a guy." And then he showed me your book, which I knew of,
Oh,
but hadn't read just because I have no interest in Tekashi 6 9 at all.
sure, lots of people who knew my previous work didn't, so
But he was like, Sean lives in Brooklyn. He's a nice guy. And basically, what he said was this guy's morals, his ethos matches up well with you and what you're trying to do with the podcast. And Brian is someone whose moral center I trust very, very much. So, with that said, I'm curious, like, about your values, the way you view masculinity, the things that you hold dear, and how that all reflects on the theme of this show. It's funny because you and I, we've had a couple of conversations, but I don't know that we've actually dug deep into that on a
yeah,
one-on-one
no, we
basis.
haven't really, it's funny, this is actually very, very interesting, and I don't know if I have a sort of plain and simple answer. I feel like growing up when I did, and in the context in which I did, the social divide between boy and girl was the primary social divide, right? In grammar school or whatever, right? And I don't exactly remember when I sort of became aware of that or problematized it or whatever, but I definitely, it was sort of a slow dawning of why is that? That's weird. What's going on with that? Why is that enforced so strongly? And as a young adult, running up against those lines sometimes, for example, having a friend who was dating someone who maybe was treating them not great and talking to the person they were dating who I knew also, like, I remember this first very visceral sense of you are breaking a code by doing this,
Mm.
right? You're siding against us. And that was very surprising to me. I don't know why it took me till my late 20s to fully stumble into this,
People never do.
but I've always had close friends who were women, my best friend of many decades. So it's not like I was unfamiliar with what it meant to hang out with them socially or what they went through in their personal lives, things like this. But just seeing this sense of you are
The,
breaking the code,
the
right?
bro
You're
code.
breaking the bro code. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. It was just such a visceral thing. And I think part of me was like, well, fuck this code. It's stupid. And that has stayed with me, I think, throughout. And I don't put much stock in that anymore
Because it's
and haven't
bullshit.
for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, as someone who is male and straight, I like a lot of things that are outside of that, that I
Very
think
narrow
are
paradigm.
yeah. Like I have been absolutely obsessed with musical theater, let's say, to give an example that is something I have a ton of interest in, not professionally, just as a
You're retired.
hobby slash interest, right? Yeah. I mean, I played in pit bands and stuff growing up, but it's only over the past few years that it's really been a huge, huge hobby interest of reading about shows, watching shows, listening to cast albums and things like this. And I don't know, that's definitely not a straight identified thing as far as it goes.
I
I
mean,
mean, maybe it is now. I don't know,
but
but
it's kind of like what is. I
right.
mean, I get why it is. I get why these divides were created, but so much stuff exists in the in between.
Hmm.
And that's one of the things I try to put across with this work is that so little of anything is black or white. And you can be straight and love musical theater. Plenty of people are.
Hmm.
You can be queer and listen to hip hop. Plenty of people are. I mean, probably much more accepted now than it was 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago. But you can be a hip hop head, and you can
Hmm.
go to a Little Brother show and be gay. You can like it, and it's just the idea that you can't because of a thing. It in theory is so easy to wrap your head around, but in practice, so many people have difficulty wrapping their heads around
Right.
it.
Right. To the point where you would sort of assume, oh, that's not for me.
Right.
Right.
Right. And you miss out on so many good things in life by, one thing that has also been sitting on my brain a lot lately is just this idea of, you talk about the bro code, and that's an element of blind loyalty.
Hmm.
Like, you have to be loyal to a particular identity
Hmm.
because it's a part of your identity.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I follow that completely. I would rather be loyal to Mike before I'm loyal to anybody, anything else that might have a commonality with something that I look like or something that I am or something that I practice. To your own self be true. So just the idea of, again, there not being so much gray area in everything, it boggles my mind. And maybe that's something that comes with age. I don't know what it is. But yeah, you can be who you are and like what you like and still
Right.
be, still a man.
Right. It's funny. I've been joking. I told my wife I was going on this podcast, and we sort of been joking all week about the word masculinity, that it is a mask, right? That's sort of the pun inherent in it. And I think that's a very real thing, right? It is performative
Sure.
as much as anything else, as much as any other gender expression or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I mean, identity in general is performative, whether it's gender identity, racial identity, sexual identity, whatever that is performative, you know. And as someone that values authenticity,
Hmm.
as shitty as a buzzword as that has become in the last 5 or 6 years, I do think that being yourself, whatever that is the best possible thing that you can be, and being
Hmm.
unapologetic about it.
I mean, look, I think this ties back in some ways into what you were talking about earlier about my writing about hip hop. And I have gotten surprisingly little grief for being a white person interviewing rap artists, writing about the music.
Not to cut you off, which I
Yeah,
also love because you're not a wigger. Like you're not
you're
giving me
bringing me
MC.
back to like 1991 with
Right.
that word,
You're
man. What are
you're
you
you're
doing?
you're not giving me MC Search. So I
I mean,
appreciate that.
well, this is what I was going to say, not quite in those terms, and I'm not going to phrase it like that, but in the sense that I've gotten less pushback than in some ways maybe I feel I should. But I think it's because I've tried to approach things respectfully, and I've tried to sort of be myself in every situation and not be like, oh, I'm around this person and thus I must act like this or whatever. And that has worked shockingly well, I guess, is how I would put it in all sorts of situations and with all sorts of people. Yeah, and all the credit in the world to everyone in these milieus for being so accepting, but I think also it's that I'm not trying to pretend that I am exactly like everyone else.
Which is there's some privilege inherent in that, right?
Of
Like,
course, absolutely.
generally speaking, straight white dudes don't have to code switch.
Right. That is actually the flip side of it, which I
Mm,
hadn't fully considered.
right.
And yeah, that is the sort of like underbelly way of looking at it, which I think actually makes a lot of sense. That yeah, I haven't had to because I'm able to walk into a lot of different sorts of spaces and it may look weird, but no one's going to be hostile or whatever. And in fact, often the opposite will be tremendously accepting if you in turn are respectful and accepting and not making a big deal out of it.
Yeah. And one thing that I have enjoyed seeing as I've gotten to know you and done some social media creeping and some other stuff is you using your privilege for good. And what I try to tell my friends with privilege, whether it's male privilege, white privilege, is in the world that we live in now, you need to use your privilege to do something other than maintain the status quo.
This is 100% why whatever my issues around religion and Judaism specifically, religion in general, I have stumbled my whole life over whether to call myself Jewish or what that means. I'll spare you my whole family background and my deep thoughts about religion and atheism and whether Judaism and how compatible these things are. Plenty of people a lot smarter than me have written and thought about these things for a long time. But the point is, ever since the genocide started in Palestine, I felt like I have had a special responsibility to say, I am Jewish and I'm not okay with this. And it's more because of what the world is doing than because of how I feel. And what I mean by that is there is a genocide and now a famine on top of a genocide being committed to keep me safe, right? In the name of Jewish safety. I'm using air quotes for your listeners who can't see me. In the name of quote unquote Jewish safety. And that is horrifying. It does nothing to keep me safe. And in fact, puts me at risk and brings out actual anti Semitism, right? And gives more credence to actual anti Semites. And so I have felt like whatever my hangups may be about calling myself a Jew, I feel like it is important for me to say this is being done in my name. And no, you can't fucking do this. And so since October, I have been trying to do what I can to use the bit of privilege, like you said, that I have in this case, just to demonstrate that this isn't a monolith, right? And that the cracks in the facade are showing.
And that's a wonderful thing. Again, I think that so many people uh, under, uh, understand their privilege and are silent anyway, which I think is the most horrible thing you can do because I do believe that silence equals complicity in a lot of cases.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that you do that. And ultimately, my question was, how do you use that privilege to inform, activate your circle, or just stand up? And
Mhm.
I think you kind of answered the question before I answered it.
Mhm.
Definitely appreciate that you're doing that. I feel not uninformed necessarily, but specifically with regards to Israel and Palestine, I don't have a ton to say other than violence is wrong no matter who's perpetrating it against whom. Violence as a response to violence is wrong.
Mhm.
My grandmother always just saying, eye for an eye will make the whole world blind.
Mhm.
And I don't think you can be okay with starvation or genocide regardless of who it's happening to or who it's happening in the name of, and call yourself a good person.
Yeah, and that is unfortunately a very controversial statement these days,
Which is
right?
insane.
Yeah.
That's common fucking sense.
Yeah. So yeah,
So,
that's sort of the most direct way I would say that I've been trying to use my identity for good, I guess I would
respect.
say. Yeah.
All right. So, I will close with a light question.
All right.
And
It's all
and
been
you're
roses and
right,
rainbows so far.
but you're a hip hop reporter, top 5 all time. Your goats.
Jeez. All right. So they haven't rapped for a number of years and they do a ton of things in addition since sort of retiring from rap. Wrote a brilliant book and done countless other things, but Jean Grey is still up there for me. Also, one of a very select number of artists who has become a friend over the years. So,
That's awesome.
count whatever bias you want in there, but they're definitely in my
Her
top five.
her book is on my list.
Yeah, yeah. The book is wonderful. I would say Black Thought is up there just for the number of "what the heck did he say" moments, right? For those kind of, like, absolutely rewind, you know, how do you even think of this type moments.
Oh yeah.
Jay is up there for me. Maybe it's just because our names are spelled the same, I don't know.
Sean recognized Sean.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. No, I love his his music, and also I really appreciate sort of the way he layers his references. It's sort of one big story that he's telling over the course of years, and things will refer back to when I said this, or this biographical element I told you about, or things I said in another song, things like that. So it feels like one continuous story, which is really quite a project, really, when you
Yep.
consider it's from 1996 until whenever his last verse was,
And
right?
remember, he was only going to record 2 albums and dip.
Or one even. It might have even been one originally. Yeah. How many is that? Is
That's
that
three.
3? Wow. Boots Riley, honestly, for me, is up there. Speaking of radical political folks, I think someone who can make just an incredible storyteller, as his movies and TV shows have worn out, right? He has the same absurdist sense of humor mixed with politics that you saw on his TV show, that you saw in his movie, have been there in his music from the
From
beginning.
day one. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just am constantly in awe of his music and the way he sort of thinks. Even before he made movies, he thought cinematically, right? You would have 2 or 3 or 4 songs in the middle of an album linked by skits and things
Right.
like this.
Right.
So he's up there. I wanna include someone semi-new. I'm sure I'm gonna kick myself for all of the people
If I'm
I'm
gonna revise this list.
not including. I will,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, of current people, I would say Droog is up there in terms of these "oh shit" moments. Not just because I'm wearing his t-shirt now, although that may be why he's top of mind, but he's so smart. He is so clever and creative and builds out such a world and personality, and his references are always just unbelievable and sort of broad based, whether it be like very specific guitar references and things that he'll work into lyrics, or specific stuff about the Q train or whatever. There's a very real person that comes through in the references, plus the layers and puns that kind of never stop. So I don't know. That's 5 today. I'm sure I'll think of 18 people I should have added and yell at you and say, "How could you have let me say this? What's wrong with you?"
You know, I love hearing people who are deep into hip hop just make them, and I do this myself. I before the show on Friday, I was going through a list and I was like, that ain't right. So it's a constant tally in my head,
Yeah.
and I would imagine for fans of any kind of music, there's all us music nerds have high fidelity running through our head.
Yeah.
There are
I
top
will
five
say
lists of
Fa
everything.
Fonte being such an excellent performer on top of world-class lyricist, definitely. I had never seen him. I had interviewed him a number of times over the years, met him briefly, but I had never seen him perform, and just to have him be such a top-notch performer
An amazing
counts
performer.
counts for a lot in my book.
And this is the third or the fourth time I've seen him. All the other shows were foreign exchange shows.
Mhm,
So this is my first time really seeing rapping Fonte as opposed to singing Fonte.
mhm.
But I'm just amazed by how many things this man can do well.
Yeah.
If he just sang, if he just rapped, if he was just a music historian,
Mhm.
if he was just like a comedian, he does so many things well.
Right,
It's mind
honestly
blowing.
honestly, yeah, he could just be the MC at a comedy club,
Yeah,
bringing people on and off and warming up the crowd,
he could
right?
be a
Sort of
comedian, like an actual
like an
comedian. He
actual
could do
comedian,
stand up.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Fonte, I'm not mad that you turned down this show like twice. It's okay.
I love the old school, leather African medallion he was wearing the other day,
Yeah,
that
he
was
had on the De La
hysterical.
medallion. Yeah, the old school De La Africa medallion. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel such a kinship with him. He's a couple years younger than me, but a lot of our references are very similar.
Mhm,
I've asked him for music recommendations on occasion.
mhm.
He always comes back with something that I've never heard before, like check this out. So
Yeah,
yeah, just talented dude, good dude.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm
Big
like,
up
"Oh,
Shawn Setaro.
man, swap out Droog for Pharoah Monch." The list would never end.
It never ends.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, this is the part where cut this. I cut the part of the episode off and leave a little bit in the end for my Patreon subscribers, and
Great.
I ask my guest to throw a question at me, and it can be about absolutely anything.
Yeah, so why this show? Why take on, like, men, Me Too, masculinity? What does it all mean? Why take this on?
Because I was curious. I've been in therapy for a long time, and through therapy, I discovered things about my identity, and through discovering things about my identity, I discovered a community, and through that community, there's been a lot of conversation about uh, being socialized as a man and what that means, and men. Then I've worked a lot in the mental health realm, and I had a period of about a year or two when I lost like four friends to suicide, one behind the other, and they were all men.
Mhm.
And I think all except one were younger than I was, and started doing work in that realm, and then like co-founded a men's group, and was basically like, so if this group of like eight dudes is sitting in a cafe in Midtown having this conversation, how many people, aside from the eight of us, want to have this conversation but don't have a forum by which to have this conversation? So I was like, let's just, I had some radio background, and I was like, well, let's just take this to the streets and, see if I can find people to talk to and put this out in the world. And I can, it can cover the mental health stuff that I work around. It can cover the sexuality stuff that I work with. It can cover like all this other stuff under the umbrella of masculinity. And, you know, at the end of 2019, my 2020 New Year's resolution was I'm going to start this podcast. And first episode went live March 9th, 2020, something like that.
Perfect time to start a new
Wasn't
venture.
it though?
Yeah.
Yes. And man, believe me when I tell you, every conversation that I have, I get something out of. So
Except this one.
including especially this one. So it's like nourishing for my soul. I love getting feedback from people who listen to the podcast or recommend the podcast and like, oh, I really enjoyed this or I got something out of this. And it's also, I can think of, my friendship with Brian, my friendship with Jason Green, a bunch of people that I interviewed for the podcast that I am now better friends with because we had the conversation.
Mhm.
So it's like it serves so many purposes. Even if I'm not even talking about outside myself and talking about just stuff that it does for me, it does so much for me. Everything that happens, everything that people outside get from it is a bonus. But it's just like this is the shit that I've been curious about and I love talking about. And one interesting thing is that a lot of guys don't small talk with me anymore. As soon as like they know about the podcast, it,
Mhm.
it all becomes like deep
So I
conversation.
was thinking about, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because for the first, 43, 44 years of my life, I wasn't having a lot of these deep conversations, and I was afraid to have these deep conversations with people. So I
Mhm.
just feel like, anything that, makes my community bigger,
Mhm.
anything that makes my relationships with people deeper, anything that helps me grow as a person is just good. So that's why I started doing it, and that's why I keep doing it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad I asked.
Of course, of course. Thank you for asking.
Big up to Shawn for taking the time to be on the podcast. Big up to Shawn for being a good dude. And thank you for allowing me to sit on your metaphorical couch and lay out my grievances about hip hop. Thank you, no, seriously, for taking the time to be on the show. Y'all, if you want to follow Shawn on Instagram, feel free to do so at Shawn Setaro. You can check out his work all over the place. If you go to Complex, look for his byline. You can read his book, Dummy Boy. I will say, even again, as a person who is not a fan of the artist, the book is very, very interesting. And I'm going to dig into that Cypher podcast because that looks right up my alley. And Fonte, if you're listening, Questlove Supreme is over. You can be on the show now. Thanks again, Shawn. Much appreciated. Thank you for listening to Detoxicity. I hope you found this particular episode interesting. And if you are new, I hope you go back and listen to all of the older episodes. Once again, my name is Mike Joseph. I am the host and producer of this show. And there are a lot of things that you can do to continue to support our mission, continue to support this podcast. Follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on TikTok as Detoxpod You can also send me an email if you'd like. I'm at detoxpod@gmail.com. I am always on the hunt for people with interesting, inspirational, and powerful stories. So if you know somebody who fits that bill, or if you yourself fit that bill, please don't hesitate to drop me a line via email or via social media. Please make sure you subscribe on your podcast platform that you're listening to this on. Rate, comment, help a brother out, help us move up in the rankings. Follow me on social media. Like I said, follow our Patreon, or subscribe to my Patreon, actually. Patreon.com/detoxicitypod. You get access to exclusive episodes. You get episodes a little earlier than the general public. You get a cool-ass sticker, lots of stuff. Once again, patreon.com/detoxicitypod. Quick shout out to Calvin Williams for providing the music and doing his magic on the logo, which was originally designed by Jacob Block. I thank you all for listening. I wish you all the best. Please take care of each other. Till next time, peace.